All right. So welcome everyone to the Reading League Florida's first event. My name is Jesse Stife. I am the president of the Reading League Florida, and on behalf of the organization, we really appreciate everyone taking their very well-earned summertime to attend a professional development session. You know, it's a real testament to the level of dedication and professionalism of the profession of teachers. And so we have about 400 people who registered, which is absolutely fantastic. There's a ton of interest in this topic. So a couple of housekeeping notes here. The session is being recorded and will be emailed out to everyone who registered. There's no PowerPoint slides or anything like that, so it won't come with a PowerPoint. This is just a moderated discussion. We've opened up both the chat and the Q&A function for the session, and we encourage everyone to definitely engage in some conversation. We're going to be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A, and we're going to be integrating as many of your questions into the conversation as we can. So please feel free to ask questions and ask for clarifications. We are using Zoom webinar, so you can see us, but we can't see or hear you. Also, when you are, if you're going to put something in the chat, remember to change that option to all panelists and attendees, not just all panelists. Okay, so going into let's introduce the speakers here. Dr. Holly Lane is the director of the University of Florida Literacy Institute, UFLI. And she is the Irving and Rose Fine Professor of Special Education at the University of Florida. When the COVID shutdowns happened last spring, the work of Dr. Lane and her team shifted to helping teachers provide effective virtual reading instruction using the UFLI Virtual Teaching Resource Hub, which is a repository of free resources that has been accessed by almost 500,000 people around the world. Just a fantastic resource. She's provided professional learning experiences for thousands of teachers, directed numerous grants to support reading research and the development of teachers and researchers, and she's the author of many publications related to literacy. Dr. Paige Pullen is the Chief Academic Officer at the University of Florida's Lastinger Center for Learning, where she's also at the University of Florida. She's also a research professor in the School of Special Education, School Psychology, and Early Childhood Studies. If you're a teacher in Florida who is pursuing their reading endorsement, you may be going through the Lastinger Center's Literacy Matrix, which is an extremely high quality professional development course that adheres to the science of reading, because Dr. Pullen and Dr. Lane, they are major contributors to the body of evidence. So she was a public school elementary and reading teacher for more than a decade. And her research focuses on implementing effective interventions for young children with or at risk for learning disabilities, especially in the area of reading. She's authored multiple pieces on literacy and special education and has conducted professional development for teachers worldwide. All right, and she's received numerous awards throughout her career. And we have Dr. Marisa Stukey. Dr. Marisa Ramirez-Stukey is a senior director with the Center for the Collaborative Classroom, fantastic professional development outlet, among many other things. She received her PhD in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in teacher education and professional learning from the University of Florida. So big UF representation here on the panel today. She's a national board certified teacher with over 15 years experience teaching in both elementary and higher education contexts, instructional coaching, and professional learning systems development. Her research interests focus on reading comprehension instruction and designing literacy professional learning. She's consulted with numerous school districts in developing change models and collaborative professional learning structures, particularly to shift practices in literacy instruction. So thank you very much to Dr. Lane, Dr. Pullen, and Dr. Stukey for being here. We're going to start off with 2 poll questions for everyone so that our panel can understand who's in the audience and kind of adjust maybe the depth and specifics of the conversation. So that first poll question should be popping up on your screen. Or the first two questions are popping up on your screen right now. So we'll take just a moment to let everyone fill that out. Lots of fans of the UFly Resource Hub, lots of fans of the Literacy Matrix. All right. Just a few more seconds. Okay. So the results are in. It looks like we have primarily, is everyone able to see the results of the poll here? All right, so it looks like we have about a third K2 primary classroom teachers, and then we have a good coach and administrator representation, special education representation. Fantastic. Just a couple of middle and no high school teachers. Let's see. And 16% something else. So perhaps parents or other university level folks. Our level of familiarity with the science of reading, most of us know quite a bit. Fantastic. I think people who are here are probably plugged into the sorts of resources on social media or in listservs who are plugged into these sorts of things. And so we're coming to this with a good amount of research, a good amount of information. Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. So the name of the session is Implementing a New Curriculum with the Science of Reading in Mind. So, we wanted to start with a brief reminder of what exactly we're talking about when we use the term science of reading. And this definition is from a resource created by a coalition of stakeholders, including the Reading League, which can be found at whatisthescienceofreading.org. Fantastic resource. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world and is derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, and why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach, and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. The science of reading is derived from researchers from multiple fields like cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology, education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, and school psychology. And the science of reading is not an ideology or a philosophy, not a fad, a trend, a new idea, a pendulum swing, a political agenda, a one-size-fits-all approach, a program of instruction, or a single specific component of instruction, such as phonics. So let's launch right into it with our first question to the panel. Maybe the most important factor in improving reading proficiency in Florida and across the country are deepening teachers' knowledge of the evidence base so that they can be better users of their curricula, and also using effective curriculum materials. Do you all think, by and large, most teachers get the necessary level of training in their teacher prep programs and in their districts? And if not, kind of talk more about some steps or resources that a teacher can take or pursue to broaden and deepen their knowledge base.
Want us to just jump in?
Yes, please.
Well, I would say, first of all, no. most teacher prep programs really do not include everything teachers need, or anything really close to that. And an even bigger problem is that we now have so many teachers who have entered the profession through different alternate routes of certification that may not have gotten any preparation in reading. And now, oh, here, teach first grade, teach children how to read. And I think we're just demanding unrealistic things, expecting somebody to come in off the street and know enough to be able to teach kids how to read. There's so much misconception just in the lay public about, well, I can read, certainly I can teach somebody else to read. And that's, nobody on this Zoom call probably thinks that's the case. There's so much more to it than that. And so when it comes to curriculum, if we don't have the knowledge and skill from our preparation, then we're going to hold on to that teacher's edition or that manual and that's going to have the answers for us, right? And we're assuming that, certainly some science went into developing the curriculum, and that's almost always never the case too, that most curricula were not developed through any kind of rigorous process of let's look at the research and see what's best. It's what can we put together and make it pretty and marketable. And so, we don't even have that to rely on to guide us. So learning to be a critical consumer, both of the curricula that you're buying or using, and to be a critical consumer of professional learning is really, really important. So understanding what it is that you're looking at is one of the reasons that we got involved with this whole concept of the literacy matrix. I'll toss it over to Paige because I think that's a good segue into some high quality professional learning that's available to teachers in Florida.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. So that is actually what Holly just described was really the impetus for our developing the literacy matrix, because there are a couple of things at play here. One is that we know teachers, through no fault of their own, exit teacher education programs without the necessary knowledge and skills to teach reading well. And sometimes when you get into the classroom, it's not until you're in the classroom that you even realize that. So Holly and I talk a lot about how the more we know how much there still is to learn. And we are kind of you're probably all with me in that space. And so, so part of it is that as a pre-service teacher educator, you may not even be in a place where you're able to realize and take advantage of what's provided to you. So that's one issue. But bigger than that is we know that the science of reading is not necessarily the constructs that are, the constructs that are supported and the strategies that are supported by research that comprises the science of reading are not necessarily taught in all teacher education programs, and that's not including University of Florida. University of Florida, we do a good job with that, but for others, that may not be the case. So we created the literacy matrix, and I know some of you I've been hearing, I've been seeing in the chat about the literacy matrix. The goal is to increase the quality and the content knowledge in the science of reading. So for good news and bad news, last year's implementation of the literacy matrix, we have a test that actually tests teachers' knowledge on the science of reading. 9% of the teachers who entered the literacy matrix last year were able to pass that test with mastery at pre-test. So that's 71% of those teachers had graduated from a traditional teacher education program. 39% of those teachers had master's degrees, yet 9% were able to pass a test on the science of reading. The good news is that after having gone through the literacy matrix, 98% passed that test. It was an 82% increase in teacher knowledge. And that is, that's close to 3 standard deviations. So in essence, going through the literacy matrix is almost the same thing as giving every single teacher that goes through that an individual tutor. So if we think of the 2 sigma effect, if you have a 2 sigma effect in your instruction, that's the effect that you would get with having an individual tutor. So that's what we've essentially done in the literacy matrix. We also know that it's not enough to have that content knowledge, that we also need to apply that in practice, which is why in the literacy matrix, it's all job embedded. So those of you who have gone through it, perhaps you can put some notes in the chat about your experience, but you learn the evidence of what works for children. And then you go and you try it in your classroom, and then you get feedback throughout the entire time that you're in the literacy matrix. So although this is not this is not the only answer, it's not even the whole answer. It is helping teachers to know what those practices should be, and helps them become critical consumers, because you then know what it is that you want to look for in a particular curriculum.
And just to add to that, I'm thinking about that deep knowledge that something like a literacy matrix really provides, deep knowledge of the evidence base and a knowledge of how that evidence base comes to life or doesn't in the curriculum tools that you have in your hands. That intersection is really, I think, what allows us to become those critical consumers, and also thinking about that intersection between your knowledge and the pedagogy that you bring to the table, the curriculum and the students that you have. That intersection there is where we really need teacher practice to shift in order to change what happens in schools for kids.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I was a person who graduated from a major state public university without the requisite knowledge in elementary education, without the requisite knowledge to teach reading. So I appreciate all the work that everyone is doing here, for sure. Okay, so moving on to our next discussion question about Tier 1 instruction. Probably Tier 1 instruction is well conceived of as prevention of reading difficulties for many students. Figures vary, but many groups will cite a statistic of up to 85% of children being able to read proficiently when strong Tier 1 instruction is in place. Can you all speak about characteristics of effective Tier 1 preventative instruction in maybe K2 and 3-5 curriculums?
Yeah, I can start with this one and then toss it around. So one of the things that we have found, particularly as we look at the activities and assignments and videos that teachers upload for the literacy matrix, and the work that we've done in schools, one of the things that's critical in Tier 1 instruction is, first of all, clearly it needs to also be grounded in the science of reading. So we need to teach those skills, those competencies and skills that we know are supported in this, by the science of reading. So that's, in this group, that's pretty obvious. But one of the things that we don't always think about in terms of instruction and selection of curricula is that the way you set up your classroom and your schedule is also extremely important. We have found that there are many teachers who feel like they don't have time to have small group instruction. And students in the primary grades are going to need small group instruction so that you can individualize the instruction to those students. Even within Tier 1 instruction, you should be looking at that class and determining which of those students are using screening and progress monitoring, making sure you are identifying kids who are likely to excel, those kids who are likely to learn as expected, and those kids who may need more support through possibly Tier 2 instruction or Tier 3 instruction. So assessment is an important piece of that. So we have to start with data. We have to continually use data to make instructional decisions, and we need to group students in ways that they are in groups where we can focus on the content and skills that they need. And that small group instruction is one piece that's often missing. So even in a classroom who understands that we need to focus on developing strong phonemic awareness and early decoding skills through systematic and explicit phonics instruction, they may be doing a lot of that whole group and not realizing that how important that small group instruction is. So the classroom, how you dedicate your time and resources and plan for instruction is just as important as the curriculum and the content that you teach.
I couldn't agree more, Paige. I think it's really one of those things that somehow we've gotten in our heads that tier 1 means like whole class spray and pray. And we can still really differentiate our instruction even within core. And it's making me think a lot about, because our practices, many of our practices are not grounded in the science of reading, we have those inverted RTI triangles, where we have just such vast numbers of students who require tier 2, but we haven't done the job we needed to do in core instruction to really ensure strong foundational skills instruction, strong phonemic awareness, strong encoding and decoding skills together. So I just see that as another really important piece for us to consider, that differentiation of those foundational skills can still happen in tier 1.
And should happen, right? Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues is, when you have multi-tiered systems of support, you've got to have that high quality core. I love the saying, you can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem, right? It's impossible to provide effective intervention for all of the kids who struggle. You've got to do high quality instruction for your core to make sure that what all your kids are getting is high quality. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of think about a little bit with regard to high quality core is, well, what are we teaching there and how are those things related? Because one of the things that in our understanding of reading as teachers, one of the things that we've really relied on is the National Reading Panel Report, which is a really important and very influential document. And if you haven't ever explored that document, you really ought to. It's where, this panel that was charged by Congress with coming up with, well, what do we know about reading, did these huge meta-analyses of these different areas of reading. And that's where the concept of the Fab Five came up with, and probably most anybody here can rattle those off: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, right? So that we all know those things are really important. And that's great, because before the National Reading Panel Report came out, it was rare that a teacher that you asked, what are the important elements of reading, could tell you that those 5 areas were important. So it's great that it's raised awareness so well. The problem is how it's usually depicted and how it's usually conceptualized. Is we think of we think of the Fab Five, these 5 areas being these 5 pillars of instruction, right? These 5 separate constructs, these 5 areas that we need to focus on. And we don't think enough about how these different things are related. And we've got comprehension as just over here as one of those pillars, when really everything that we do in reading instruction ought to serve the goal of comprehension. Comprehension is our outcome. It's not one of our pillars. It's not one of the things that we do. It's the outcome of all of the other things that we're doing. And if you think about those other pillars, well, phonemic awareness is supposed to serve our decoding skills. It's supposed to contribute to better decoding skills, and decoding skills are supposed to contribute to better reading fluency, and reading fluency is supposed to contribute to comprehension. And then you've got vocabulary and all of the other elements of language that also contribute. So a lot of you have probably heard of the simple view of reading is another way to think about it, or Hollis Scarborough's rope metaphor for depicting the different components of that contribute to proficient reading. We have the Florida Reading Initiative conceptual framework of different influences on comprehension. And I think any one of those that you take and look at it, it's so important to realize how the different elements are related and how one thing needs to contribute to the next. Because I'll see, way too often, instruction over here in one area and over here in another area that really is not coordinated. It's not, one thing isn't contributing to the other like it should. And something like phonemic awareness is treated as though achieving phonemic awareness is a goal, when it really isn't at all.
Mhm.
The only reason we work on phonemic awareness is to help kids become better decoders. And if that's not your focus, then something's wrong with your phonemic awareness instruction. So really understanding deeply the different areas and how they're connected to each other, I think, is probably the most important element. And it's such a critical piece of effective core instruction.
Holly, when you say that, it makes me think too about the orchestration of all of those pieces together that really build a reader. And when we think about effective tier 1, that shifts over time. So the way we spend our time in core instruction and the things we spend them on in kindergarten are going to be different than what we spend them on in 3rd grade, different than what we spend them on in 5th grade, because as that orchestration becomes more sophisticated, our time efforts are going to be different. And so I think similar to you, like what you're talking about, I've heard a lot about like advanced phonemic awareness for kids who are older. But my wondering is if they've established that, why would we spend time there if we know that phonemic awareness is a means to an end? So we have to think about how our time gets spent along the way rather than get caught up on the 5 pillars and equal representation in them across the way.
Exactly.
I'd like to add to that, Marissa. That's a really important point. And we've actually, because of some of that very thing that you're talking about, we rewrote the phonemic awareness strand. So the new phonemic awareness strand in the literacy matrix is being a little bit more explicit about that. One of the other things that happened when the National Reading Panel was published, as Holly was saying, it took these areas and, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, and we thought about them as each of these pillars needing to be developed almost one before the other, like it was a hierarchy of skills. One of the problems there is that when people started thinking about phonemic awareness, they started thinking about phonological awareness as a whole, and that we needed to build phonological awareness at all of these different levels before they got to phonemic awareness. And I can say that, in a book that Holly and I wrote together, we did that very thing. What we know now, we've learned a lot since that time, is that we don't need to spend as much time on those earlier skills. Once a child gets to kindergarten, we should really be focusing on the phoneme level. So if you think about what example I gave in the newly to be released version of the literacy matrix this fall, if you consider 2 kindergartners and they come in, and one kindergartner has had an enormous opportunity with family to play with language and develop rhymes, and they have all, you do a phonological awareness assessment, and they've got really high skills on phonological sensitivity. Then you take another student and you assess them on those phonological skills, and they don't have that same level. So then what do? We have 2 children entering kindergarten. The second child, you may spend time developing those phonological sensitivity skills. The second child, you start immediately with phonemic awareness and very quickly start adding letters to that, and they're going to be decoding. And then, by Christmas, they're well on their way and they're taking off. Meanwhile, by Christmas, the child who you're spending clapping out syllables or jumping for the number of words in a sentence haven't gotten to phonemic awareness. What we know now is that those 2 sets of skills, phonological sensitivity, which are those larger units of sound, actually develop independently from phonemic awareness. So we can develop phonemic awareness aside from phonological awareness. So once you get into kindergarten, your focus should really be on phonemic awareness and getting those letters added very quickly so we can get children to the point where they are decoding. So as Marissa said, phonemic awareness is a means to an end. We need to spend some time making sure that they can segment and blend those sounds together. But as soon as they can do that and they know letter names, we need to get those, they know letters, some of their letters and letter sounds, we need to get those mapped together immediately. And I think that's one of the mistakes that I'm included in that bunch that have made that error myself, and spending maybe too much time on those earlier skills. And certainly it's true if you have older students who don't have that phonemic awareness, you can teach that concept very quickly and then move right into decoding. Because remember, phonemic awareness and decoding skills are reciprocal. As you teach phonics instruction and children learn to decode, their phonemic awareness is going to improve.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of times, teachers wanting to differentiate and pull apart phonemic awareness and decoding skills, and they can't be, and they shouldn't be. And if you're using letters, then it's phonics, it's not phonemic awareness. Well, no, it's both. It can be both. Your goal can be both developing kids' phonemic awareness and developing their decoding skills at the very same time using the exact same lesson. And that is really more effective. Way back when the National Reading Panel that I was referring to, in that report, it was published 21 years ago now, that it said that phonemic awareness instruction that includes letters is more effective than phonemic awareness instruction that doesn't. And so we've all been in a PD somewhere where someone told us, well, you can do phonemic awareness in the dark, right? Well, yeah, I suppose you could, but just because you could doesn't mean that you should, right? You should include letters as soon as you possibly can, and really from the very beginning. And so don't think about it having to be two separate parts of your lesson. If you are teaching kids grapheme phoneme correspondences, and you're teaching kids how to blend the phonemes together to form words while looking at the letters, you're teaching phonemic awareness at the same time that you're teaching their decoding skills. So don't think of those as separate lessons. You don't need to do separate things to do those things.
There's a question in the chat, and I can answer that. So the question in the chat is essentially, what should I do as a teacher if I know that the curriculum my district has chosen is really weak in phonics? So that's a very good question, and there are many programs out there that are like that. And so there are a couple of different options. I mean, ideally, you would have a core phonics program that is district-wide that your students are going through. What you want to make sure that you do absolutely is ensure that there is a scope and sequence and that you are leaving nothing to chance. That's where the explicit and systematic instruction comes in. So explicit instruction, meaning that you're going to be, very direct. You're going to provide a lot of modeling, a lot of scaffolding and support. You're not going to have children, guess the sounds of letters or try to figure it out through constructing that knowledge. Systematic means that you're going to teach letters and sounds in a systematic way, and you're going to make sure that kids have mastered those sounds and that you continue to have cumulative practice. So Holly and I both have different scopes and sequences that meet those guidelines, where you can create additional supporting activities around, related to phonics and teach those sounds, letter sound spellings. But as somebody just put in there, if you use foundations or OG with some students, but if you don't have those curricula, you still want to make sure that you look at it for a scope and sequence, that you design your instruction that meets those guidelines. So some of the guidelines include making sure that you teach the most high frequency sounds before less common sounds, that you're going to teach sounds that are visually or auditorily similar far apart. So you don't want to teach the letter B and then, next week teach the letter D. You want to teach letters to mastery. So you want to teach letter sound spellings. You want to focus on the main sound first, not multiple spellings at one time. So we can, there are resources out there, and we can post them on either the Lastinger site, the UFly, the University of Florida Literacy Institute site, with different scope and sequences. SIPS has a scope and sequence and Marisa can probably talk about that. But the question being, if you don't have that curriculum, what do you do? And so that is to make sure that you either find a curriculum and use that scope and sequence, even if you can't get the entire curriculum, or find a scope and sequence that follows those guidelines.
Yeah, there are just some really critical pieces of what you can do within whatever curriculum, or even if your school doesn't provide a curriculum, which, you know, that happens as well. There are things that you can do to have really powerful instruction in those foundational skills. And so obviously what Paige was just saying, following a scope and sequence that is logical and that has that fits some of the key characteristics. One of them being that most of the early sounds that you're focusing on are continuous sounds. So those sounds that you can hold out or you can elongate them. So it sounds like s and and v and f, as opposed to sounds that you have to stop, like t or d or b, right? If you have those stop sounds, when you're trying to blend those at the beginning of a word, it's really, really hard. And so a study that came out just last summer that I just love is this concept of teaching kids to blend sounds together through connected phonation. And what that means is you are saying mat as opposed to at, right? So you're helping them pull it together like that. So they're basically just saying it more quickly. And what was really cool about this study is that when kids were taught to blend by doing that and then saying it more quickly, they transferred their blending skills over to those stop sounds so they could combine them without having that modeled for them, because you can't model holding out, you know, at, right? You can't hold that out. And so that, I think, is something, knowing those things, knowing that level of nuance can make such an important difference in your instruction to be able to make it more powerful and more effective. Having things like word chains that you've put together really thoughtfully. So it's not just any combination of letters. Which letters have we taught, which ones are we needing to practice, and then making it so that kids are just changing one thing at a time. We do a lot of work with manipulative letters and, you know, moving the M away and putting in an S, and what does that do to the word, and getting kids to actually blend those sounds together. So they're practicing their phonemic skills, but really focusing in on those pieces and really getting kids to attend to the individual letters in the word is what's going to move them along more quickly. And so you want to make sure you've got those kinds of things. And that doesn't require a curriculum. It's easier if you've got a curriculum that does all that for you. But one of the things that we've seen in a lot of the new curricula that are being adopted is that there's just so much in there. And a lot of it is not effective, or it's fluff and just it's kind of extra. And you've got to really wade through to find the good stuff. And there may not be enough good stuff there. So you've got to have the background knowledge as a teacher to be able to make the judgments. Because I don't know of any of the current core curricula that any teacher could possibly do everything that they've got there. That, you know, so you've got to be able to pick and choose.
Wisely.
But you're right, as far as the foundational piece, it's the one thing that's pretty much across the board one of the weaker things of the big core curricula.
You know, one of the things that I think about in Amy's question around weak foundational skills is sometimes you'll even see a decent scope and sequence, right? Like when you lay it down and you lay that scope and sequence down to some other really highly regarded ones, they look the same, but what you'll notice is happening is the instructional routines aren't strong enough, or the sequence moves too quickly and students don't have enough time to really practice in connected text, the sound spelling patterns that they're learning. And so when you think about how to adjust, it's thinking about what are the most powerful things that I know need to be present. I know that, you know, students need to have enough time to master that. That's what Paige brought up earlier is this idea of mastery. And if they haven't mastered them, we can't quickly just go to the next letter. So we may need to really think about adjusting the pace at which that instruction happens and ensuring mastery and ensuring that kids have the ability to practice those newly found skills in those controlled vocabulary texts that allow them to do that work.
Right. I think the excuse me, the concept of cumulative review, I think that Dr. Lane or Dr. Pullen had mentioned is really, really important there. Many of our ubiquitous kind of foundational curriculums simply don't provide the requisite amount of repetition over time in order for those phoneme grapheme correspondences to truly be mapped for mastery. So that's fantastic. So we definitely spanned a number of our possible discussion questions here. We talked a little bit about some red flags and foundational skills. What I want to talk a little bit about are some we talked about some red flags for the other portion of Scarborough's reading rope, our linguistic comprehension portion. So what are some common red flags in our sort of vocabulary, language structure, syntax, comprehension strategy material that you look for, or you look out for in K2 and 3.5? And what are some characteristics that we want to see?
Well, I think for vocabulary, the biggest problem is that still all these years since we really had some breakthroughs in vocabulary, Isabel Beck's books have, came out. We learned so much. Still, most core curricula, the vocabulary that they select are just poor selections. One of the examples that I've heard Isabel use in professional development was the idea of, it was the sentence from a Basel in 3rd grade core curriculum was, Frederick was likely to avoid playing the ukulele. It's like, what word do you think there was all sorts of activities for? And they spent days on learning ukulele, right? And why? And the way that she put it, I thought was just perfect. You come to that word, kids aren't going to be able to decode it anyway, because it's such a weird word. And you say, that word is ukulele. A ukulele is like a small guitar. Let's keep reading. That's exactly the amount of attention that it deserves. And instead, there's workbook pages and activities and all this kind of stuff. That's one of the biggest things, is just selecting better words to focus on. And so if your curriculum doesn't do a good job of that, doesn't select important words that are going to be high utility words, then you've got to do the selection. Ignore which ones they select, pick ones yourself. Find it. You can now go to collinsdictionary.com, and they have all of the student-friendly explanations for words. So you don't even have to come up with those. It's online, available to you. And that to me is a really important start. The other big one that I think is, or two big ones, one is morphology, which kind of is related to both vocabulary and to decoding. It really fits in both categories, and understanding morphemes and how they are used. We tend not to even go there in a lot of the curricula until, 4th grade, 3rd grade at the earliest. That's stuff that you can start in 1st grade, and certainly start to focus on in 2nd grade. But then syntax, I hardly hear anything about syntax in instruction. And that's such an important piece just of oral language development. And so that side of the simple view equation, or that part of the Scarborough's rope, you really have to understand how simple things like the order of the words in the sentence can completely change the meaning of the sentence. Mm-hmm. And even something like the emphasis that you put on a particular word can completely change the meaning of the sentence. And kids need to be sensitized to that. They need to understand how those nuances can affect their understanding. So those are things that I think are very seldom done well.
Mm-hmm. You know, Holly, just adding to that, it's making me think about polysyllabic decoding and morphology, that connection. You know, oftentimes explicit phonics instruction ends at complex vowels. I would argue kids continue to need that explicit and systematic instruction in polysyllabic decoding, being able to be flexible with their vowels, and then connecting that to the morphology piece, right? So again, that connection is really essential. I think another issue is around comprehension strategy instruction. I've spent a lot of time in my career really thinking about that. But those strategies are a so that, right? Kids learn those strategies so that they can build knowledge, so that they can access content. And that isolated strategy use, or for me in particular, strategies for the sake of strategies, is really ineffective and really rampant. And so, you know, there's a significant body of research around comprehension strategy instruction, but they're never in service of just doing the strategy as a result. It's always in service of gaining content and increasing your knowledge as a result of interacting with text. And so that's another piece that I think as we go further up the grade levels really needs to be attended to in a systematic way.
Well, and just the development of knowledge in particular, really getting kids so that they can talk about the world around them, that, you know, whether it's the social world or the, you know, the scientific world around them, but really understanding concepts. That's one of the things that, you know, for teachers in Florida, I just want you to know this if you don't already. One of the biggest ways that you can improve your kids' performance on the FSA is teaching them science and social studies. Because about half, starting in, I think, 4th grade, half of it is informational text, and all of the content from that informational text comes from our social studies and science standards. And if kids haven't learned the content, they can read the words and not understand it well enough to answer the questions. But if they know the content, if they know about science and social studies, they can be not even that great at figuring out the words, and they'll still be able to understand well enough to answer the questions. So, you know, in addition to the foundational skills we've talked about to be able to read the words, you want to make sure that you're teaching content. And, you know, in the name of reading achievement, you know, we see kids are struggling. We've cut out science and social studies content, or cut it way down in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade. And so by the time they get to 3rd grade, they don't know all the stuff they're supposed to know. And they aren't able to read that content on the test and do well.
Yeah, Nell Duke has talked about that so much, about really ensuring that they get quality social studies and science time, not necessarily just replacing your reading text with content area text, but that they actually do get that instruction. Sorry, Paige, go ahead.
No, that's okay. But this whole, you know, this whole topic, we know that many kids who struggle initially have problems acquiring those foundational skills. So they are not able to decode. If they're not able to decode, they read less, they see less vocabulary, they comprehend less, and it's a, you know, it's just it's a domino effect.
Sorry.
So one of the things that, as Holly was talking earlier about vocabulary and selecting vocabulary to teach, and I put a chat in, you know, in the chat I dropped in, you don't have to wait until 1st grade. And I'm just going to tell a couple of stories. And Holly has told these stories as well, I'm sure. We use my son, Gabriel, who's now 17 and doesn't like for me to tell stories, but he's not on, so it's okay. When he was really little, like very little, I read to him, just like all of you read to your children. And I would clarify word meanings, just like Holly gave the example. This is ukulele. This word is ukulele. Ukulele is like a hat. And that's the end. I mean, like a small guitar. I'm going to tell you a story about the hat. So around Halloween one year, it was September. Gabriel was 2.5, not even 3 years old yet. We go to the mall and he sees a pirate costume and he said, "Oh, mommy, you need to take that pirate costume to the cash register. I would look so handsome. I would look so handsome in this pirate costume. You need to take it to the cash register." So what's a mom to do but to rush right to the cash register and buy the pirate costume? So I did. Later that evening, we were home and we he was sitting in his high chair. His dad got home. He immediately like started pulling the high chair apart to get out. And he said, I need to go put on my pirate costume. He came down in his pirate costume and he starts telling his dad about the pirate costume. And then he realized suddenly that his costume didn't come with a bandana. And he turned to me and he said, Mama, my costume didn't come with a bandana. And then he turned to my husband and he said, you know, Daddy, a bandana is kind of like a hat. And he clarified the word meaning for his dad, who was sure didn't know what a bandana was. So the moral of that story is that simply by reading books and clarifying those word meanings, we can make young children very word conscious. So he was very word conscious from very early on. And so he was able to understand the power of words and figure out what other words meant. Consequently, when he was 4 and in pre-K, and Holly may even remember the story better than I do, because I think she's told it more, but the class was reading a book about volcanoes. And you want to tell this one, Holly?
Sure. Well, you didn't know that the class was reading the book about volcanoes, and I think you were tucking him into bed, and all of a sudden
I was
said,
reading some other book, and
he said,
something about
Mommy,
lava.
did you know that when magma reaches the Earth's surface, we call it lava?
Right, that's what it was.
Like, yeah, sure.
Okay.
How did he get that? But he was attending to the vocabulary around him and understanding the content in preschool. So, but just having that routine built up with him, Paige had established, whenever she used a word in his presence that he didn't know the meaning of, she'd just turn and say, that's like, and give him a synonym that he knew. And that alone just made a huge difference. That was another one of my favorite stories, was watching TV, and he heard the word seized, the police had seized something or something like that. It's like, Mommy, what does seized mean? And she said, well, that's like caught or captured. And he turns and goes, oh, you mean like apprehended. He was 4, right? But because he had that, constant conversations just about words, he was ready to understand. Just having good choices of words like that, so that he understands these different shades of meaning or different applications of different words. That's something that our curriculum hardly ever do.
Well, and it's such an important piece because, Zaretta Hammond talks a lot about word wealth and around instructional equity. And like, Paige, when you're saying that, it's making me think about if every child had the opportunity to just engage within the awareness of words, what they absorb around them. And it's really incumbent on us to ensure that all our students have the opportunity to get seized and apprehended and bandana as a part of their world.
Right. And, we talk, Holly and I have talked about that magma and lava story a lot, in that, they had read a book. So I ended up getting the book that they had read, and we started talking about, so likely other kids were learning maybe the word volcano. Well, that was a word he already knew, so he was able to attend to these other words. And so we can't wait until kids are even in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade to start thinking about this. We really need to start early on. The other good piece of information for those of you who are administrators and may have pre-K in your classrooms, we are developing a pre-K literacy matrix right now. So we are expanding to a pre-K literacy matrix, and we will have a strand on oral language development talking about these very issues. But ultimately, the decoding skills are necessary, but we have to be building that content knowledge, background knowledge, vocabulary. The Snow article from, I think it was 2002, that showed the entering kindergartners receptive vocabulary levels and its relationship to comprehension in 1st grade versus 4th grade versus 7th grade. That correlation goes up over time. So what's happening as kids all learn how to decode, eventually we get to the point where we've got most kids decoding, that the variable that's going to make the biggest difference in whether a child understands what he or she reads is going to be in that background knowledge and vocabulary.
Right. Excuse me. So I'm aware we have just a couple of minutes left until our 5 o'clock end time. So what I wanted to do here is kind of go into our hot take section of the discussion, where we have a couple of issues, some hot button issues in education, and I wanted to hear sort of quick takeaways from the panel here, and we'll probably have time for maybe about two or three of them before we do our concluding remarks. So let's start. We talked about letters in use of in explicit phonemic awareness instruction, a hot button issue. Let's talk a little bit about the use of predictable books, our levels A through D books in our primary classrooms. Let's get our takes here.
Holly has a lot of strong opinions on this.
I do have a lot of strong opinions about
Let's
this.
do it.
I do too. So we'll see if our opinions are aligned. or
I'm
not.
sure they do.
Let's merge.
Yeah, Paige and I joke that we share a brain, so I'm sure
We'll
that
see, but we haven't talked about this lately, so we'll see if our brains still merge.
So the concept, there are lots of different kind of continua that you can classify different books on. And so decodability is an important one. Predictability is another one. There are lots of different things. And so the issue of decodable text is something that had what we hear a lot in the science of reading communities, that are out there is decodable text, decodable text, decodable text. And there's a really important place for decodable text in instruction. When you're teaching kids how to decode, they need lots of opportunities to practice the decoding skills that you're teaching, and decodable text provides really great practice for that. There's lots of other ways you can do that too, but reading in connected text is really important. But there is this really big pushback where level text have now been dubbed this evil thing. And if we're really basing what we're advocating for on science, there's really no science to tell us that leveled books are a bad thing. There is a lot of instruction that typically will go with leveled books that is bad. The biggest thing that I would classify as really ineffective, it is, and actually harmful, is teaching kids that an effective strategy for figuring out a word is to look at the picture and guess. And leveled books, especially the very early levels of leveled books, support that because the words are too hard for them to read, and the pictures are very transparently supportive of them getting the words right. That's a really bad teaching strategy. Has nothing to do with the book itself. The book itself is just a book, right? There's nothing harmful about the book. It's the strategy that you're using with it. And fortunately, it's a very common strategy with those early level texts. So the only study that has ever truly compared side by side decodable, more decodable and less decodable text found that it didn't matter. If you have, but these were both implemented with a strong phonics curriculum, strong phonics instruction. It didn't matter what kind of text you had, they did the same. Kids in both groups did really well. Didn't matter which kinds of books you had. So if we are really committed to following the science of reading, we need to look at the evidence and what the evidence does and doesn't tell us. Evidence does tell us kids need practice in whatever skills that we're teaching, and decodable text is a great way to give kids that practice. If we're teaching decoding, they should have text that they can read by decoding. But it doesn't mean that you should toss out your level books. There are really good books. There's lots of good content. And as soon as you get past those early levels where the pictures kind of give it away, those are good books to practice too. The other feature, and I'll stop because I know you're trying to wrap us up, Jesse. The other important feature is this concept of statistical learning. That when you're learning about letter sound correspondences, one of the things you have to understand is which is it most likely to be. If there's several different choices of what sound can be associated with this grapheme that I'm seeing, then I need to know, well, which is it going to be most of the time? Which is it going to be next most of the time? And the only way that you can do that is really getting exposed to a lot of text. And so as soon as kids have more than one sound for a letter, they need to be exposed to text that isn't just focusing on that one sound. They need to see it in a realistic statistical difference. If in most text, 70% of the time it's this sound and 12% of the time it's this sound, then they should be able to see text that follows those statistical probabilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we actually agree. So I wasn't sure because we haven't talked about this a lot, but one of the things that is a bit frustrating to me is that when people talk about the science of reading, they say that if you're not using decodable text, it's not the science of reading. And we do not have the evidence to support that. So I have recently done a significant literature search on any kind of research article that talks about text. What I found, so Joe Jenkins did a comparison.
That's the study that I was mentioning.
Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah. So
that's
Joe
the
Jenkins
one that does the comparison. The
does
only
the
one that does a
comparison.
direct comparison like that.
Direct comparison. It's the only one I could find. Then there were others that looked at authentic text, and they're not talking about level, they're talking about authentic text versus decodable text. So here, when you're looking at different types of texts, if you need to think about the purpose. So the other thing that we talk about a lot in the literacy matrix and in our professional development is that when you make a decision about reading instruction, you make it with intentionality. You make a decision for a purpose. So when you choose a book, you're choosing that book for a purpose. If your purpose is to practice the skills, the letter sound correspondence that the student has just learned, and you want them to practice those skills, then allow them to use decodable text with that, but that should not be the only text that you use. That's going to give them practice in decoding words with those letters and sounds. We just talked about how important vocabulary is and background knowledge to later comprehension development. If we only do decodable text, we are not combining, we talked about the FRI framework and these the pillars of reading when they're really not pillars. It all works together. We can't separate everything. And the reality is when you get to a book, when you get to books without pictures, you're going to have to learn how to figure out what a word is aside from everything else. And what good readers do is they first look at the print and then they use pictures to confirm or content or whatever. So we want to use a combination of both authentic text and decodable text so that kids have an opportunity to have enough practice in those letter sound correspondences that they want to practice, and that is for the purpose of practicing. But when you are reading, you want to read authentic text, and if it's leveled, that's fine. Whether it's leveled or not leveled, you can use the levels to get kids. You don't want to have kids reading books on their own that are, they're reading with 70% accuracy. That's not going to be helpful at all. So the levels do help you in some way. Lexiles, regardless of what levels you use, they're going to get you to an approximation of that child's difficulty level. So you want to stay within that range. But like Marisa and Holly said, it's what you do with those leveled books. It's the instruction that you provide that is the problem, not the books themselves. So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want to have text. Those texts are in schools. Are we just going to throw all the books away because they happen to have a level on them? And the answer is no. But we need to be thinking about what we're doing with those texts, and if using the levels is the only way we're determining whether kids are making progress. And that's not what we're doing. We're going to make sure that we're using curriculum-based measures to monitor the students' progress, that they're developing those decoding skills. We're going to be thinking about their vocabulary development. We're going to be looking at all of the different pieces comprehensively. And so I think together we've kind of.
Well, and I hope all 115 people that are on this webinar that are also in the Facebook groups that I'm in talking about the science of reading will now be equipped to answer this question all together, because it is such a hot topic and it's been a really important thing for us to continue to talk about.
Absolutely.
I did drop in the chat when you were talking about word chains, readingapp.flamingolearning.org. I'll put it in again. This is a free app that you can use, and we have built in word chains that we know are already that follow certain sequences. We actually took the core phonics survey, and we did based on the based on those different levels within the core phonics survey, we created word chains that are systematically designed, and the reading app itself allows you to do manipulative letter work either on an iPad with a student face-to-face or through virtual instruction. So I will drop that in the chat as well. I didn't say anything when I dropped it in because the subject changed, but I do want you to have access to that. It is free, and I can. So here's the. So there's the app. When you go to log in, if you use this BEST 2021, as in the best standards, BEST 2021 is your join code. If you use that join code, you can access the reading app for free. And if you have questions about it, there's a place you can ask questions once you go onto that website. So please make use of that. It's a pretty cool app.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Pullen. I mean, just a wealth of resources that are coming out of this presentation here in the chat. It's so nice to see. So I do realize we are a bit over time. I know that everyone's time is very valuable. So I just want to ask our panelists if they have any concluding remarks or any pieces of guidance that we didn't talk about that you want to take this opportunity to say. Any broad takeaways? If not, that's okay.
I think the only thing I would add, Jesse, is that, this is our first event as the Reading League Florida. We really would encourage all of you to join the Reading League Florida for more content like this. And I'm sure one of our friends and colleagues will add that link to join us in the chat. So that was just one thing I was thinking about.
We have a few questions in the chat also, and I'm trying to type answers. I haven't gotten to all of them. But one, Jesse, you can answer this one as to whether or not they'll receive a certificate of attendance for this.
We don't have a certificate of attendance for this. There's no CEUs or credits that were planned as a result of attendance, but you should be getting a follow-up email from Eventbrite where it'll say, yes, you attended, and you get the recording as well. So yes, I will make sure to drop a link in the chat. And another way to sign up for membership in the Reading League Florida is to visit us on Facebook. We are the Reading League Florida. You can also find us you can find a link to our website there, but the link is fl.thereadingleague.org. There you can find additional resources as well as links to be a member if you'd like. It does help us keep the lights on, and it does help us be able to bring you continued high quality PD like this. Just to drop a couple of other pieces of information. Our next event will be on August 10th with Dr. Stephanie Snyderich, who's also from the University of Florida. It should be a fantastic one. Coming up in September through December, we have sessions on teaching reading to students with speech, sound, and language disorders. We have sessions on the science of reading assessment and teaching students from diverse linguistic backgrounds. So, and many, many more. You can reach us at info@fl.thereadingleague.org, and I'll drop that in the chat as well, or message us on Facebook. And so Dr. Pullen has just presented here the Flamingo Learning site. Thank you, Dr. Pullen.
Yeah, so this is the reading app. Somebody asked how to log in. So I just shared the link. You click on this little person up here. Then you click it again, and I'm already logged in, but it'll say, it'll say either log in or create an account. You click on create an account. The first thing it'll ask you is for that join code, and you put in BEST 2021 is how you get into that. So this is something else we could do some other time. I can demonstrate how to use this and all the different things that it offers, but I think we're out of time today to show you how to use it. But you can get in there and play around with it, and then you can certainly contact us if you have other questions.
We'd love to have you back.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Jesse can talk to me into just about anything.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.